So happy Valentine's Day, everybody. We're here today because over the last 2 days I have filed on behalf of Carlos and Jemima Guimaraes a civil lawsuit against Christopher Brann, who, as all of you probably know by now, was their former son-in-law, who was the husband of their daughter. The lawsuit alleges, amongst other things, fraud on the court, wrongful imprisonment, and slander based on the conduct of Chris Brann. The basis of the lawsuit is fundamentally, when Chris and Marcelli were getting divorced, Brann perpetrated a fraud on the court. In an effort to do so, he obtained a fraudulently obtained judgment from the family court. That fraudulently obtained judgment absolved him of any wrongdoing in the marriage, including sociopathic behavior, including domestic violence. He used that fraudulently obtained judgment to stand on its shoulders and build the basis of a criminal case against Carlos and Jemima Guimaraes and against Marcelli Guimaraes. As you know, I only represent Carlos and Jemima, but that formed the basis for their criminal conduct. Essentially, what Brann was able to do was to lie to the family court, to lie under oath, to absolve himself of any wrongdoing, then take that judgment to the U.S. Attorney's Office and say, hey, 2.5 years after my wife left to Brazil, her grandparents, my son's grandparents, were involved in the kidnapping, and their only defense to that is the escape from domestic violence, and I have a judgment saying I was not a domestic violent person, so therefore you can prosecute them. It's interesting to see this because if you look at the timeline, Brann obtained his judgment from the family court in February of 2016. 15. He then got the decree entered 9 months later in November of 2015, and as he testified in the criminal trial, it was then and only then that he decided to go to the U.S. Attorney to pursue criminal action against Carlos and Jemima as well as Marcelli Guimaraes. It's fascinating to note that he waited all of that time, over 2 years from when Marcelli went to Brazil, without taking any legal action, without seeking any law enforcement recourse, and waited till the fraudulently obtained judgment was codified to then seek the assistance of the U.S. Attorney. At that point, Brann continued to perpetrate his lie in a well-developed, very sophisticated media campaign as well as under oath. As you all know, he's been on TV multiple times, pitching the same story that he obtained in the family court, and then he lied in front of the U.S. Senate. He lied in front of the U.S. House of Representatives. He lied in the criminal court as well. The damage that has caused this family, particularly Carlos and Jemima, is extensive and it's unfathomable. I'm not sure that any of us can imagine what it's like to have your name dragged through the mud that way, to be prosecuted criminally, to be taken off of an airplane when you're going to your grandson's birthday party like common criminals, to lose huge amounts of your life savings, to have the rest of it tied up in a criminal bond, only to be facing incarceration, arrest, and now further incarceration in the federal penitentiary when they report later this month for Carlos and the beginning of the next month for Jemima. This lawsuit is all about the fact that Chris built this house of cards on fundamental lies. When you go look at his media campaign, it's even more striking what's occurred. His media campaign is chock full of lies about how he lived such a lonely life and the horror of this incident and how he cries himself to sleep, how his house is a mausoleum to his son as he patiently waits the return of his child that he will one day see again. What he does not tell you is that during the time of the divorce, while he was perpetrating this fraud, he met a 22-year-old Laura Navarro, self-proclaimed lifestyle blogger, whom he courted, got engaged to, planned an extensive wedding, and was married 7 months after the divorce proceeding was finished with Marcelli, and 2 months before the divorce decree was even entered. He doesn't tell you that behind the scenes, when nobody else is looking, when your cameras aren't pointing at him, he's spending thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars on his new bride, Laura, and his new child. He gives news interviews about his house being a mausoleum to his son. The house that Carlos and Jemima paid the down payment on. The house that was his marital estate with Marcelli. That he now lives in with his new bride and his new child. The house that they purchased for them. He doesn't tell you any of that. Instead, what he does is he waits till he's under oath and he spins a web of lies. That's what the fundamental premise is of this case. His behavior and his conduct in the marriage was nothing short of, in my opinion, and of course I'm not a psychologist, but in my opinion, sociopathic. It was marked with domestic violence, sexual deviance, sexual abuse in varying forms, pornography addiction. He leaves that out. He wants to tell you that Marcelli was the aggressor and he was an innocent victim who was just trying to capitulate to his wife. He doesn't want to tell you about the medical records that we've attached that prove that he beat her. He doesn't want to tell you the true story about throwing her through a wall and busting the sheetrock, where he then gives 3 or 4 different versions of that incident in the subsequent trials. He doesn't want to tell you about the content of his journals that have been produced as an exhibit in this case that document whatever it is that's going on in his head that I am incapable of understanding. But that is the basis on which we've brought this lawsuit, is to expose the truth that's happened. Carlos and Jemima have been through horror. They're now facing more horror. Now that the criminal trial is done, the damage is set. They will be incarcerated again. They have been ordered to pay limited damages and restitution. And now, after this work that we've done investigating this case, we've decided to file a lawsuit to seek retribution for that damage that he's caused through his course of conduct of fraud. You simply cannot go to a court and defraud them and obtain a judgment and then use that judgment to injure other people. That is, as I indicated, in my opinion, nothing short of criminal and sociopathic behavior, and that's why we filed this lawsuit. I may have a few comments as we get a little further, but I thought I would open the floor to you for any of you to ask questions about anything that you'd like to know. As you're aware, I've handed you all a copy of the petition as well as the exhibits that we filed in this case.
Are you guys suggesting the abduction, Marcelli's abduction, as it's characterized widely, it wasn't an abduction at all?
I think that to say that I'm suggesting that is an understatement. Marcelli's flee to Brazil was done for her life, was done for the life of her son. It is well documented and established in the lawsuit as to the abuse that had occurred up to that point in time and when exactly she has to have felt that she had no remedy. She did this as a mother to protect her child. Her parents, Carlos and Jemima, did what any human being would do in the circumstance, which is to take in their daughter and their grandchild to protect them from that very same domestic violence. That is the domestic violence that, in Marcelli's absence, Brann used as an opportunity to reframe the story, pitch her as the aggressor, pitch himself as an innocent victim, and get a judgment from the court saying that he did nothing wrong, including specifically domestic violence. This was never an abduction. It was an effort from a mother to protect her child and the effort from parents to protect their child and their grandson from the monster that was Chris Brann.
It sounds like you're saying Chris's lies throughout this whole process have led to Marcelli being considered an international fugitive? That's
exactly what's happened. Understand the history of when this occurred. When Marcelli went to Brazil and decided not to return. Shortly after that fact, and after she'd gotten protection from the Brazilian courts, Brann's lawyer went down and did, I guess, what most lawyers would do, which is to say, well, let's try to get an order from the court to turn the child back over, forcing her to turn the child back over. Bizarrely, there became one line in that order that's very out of place. It makes no sense in the rest of the order, and that line says that the allegations that have been made against Chris Brann were false and made with malice. It's funny that they used that phrase because it continued to recur throughout the history of this case going forward. So much so that Brann quoted it verbatim in his victim impact speech at the sentencing case of the criminal trial. When he obtained that singular sentence, he seized an opportunity at that point to say, I can now build a case that I was the good guy and she was the aggressor, because I now have a finding from the court that says that's true. The motion that supported that order said nothing of it at all. The affidavits that supported it said nothing of that at all. But the order, that line got inserted, and Brann used that as a building block to fundamentally reframe the case. When you get to the criminal trial, you can see it plain as day, because then he starts to tell stories of how I capitulated to her, and I just simply tried to reason with her, and she was just this horrible monster that would come after me, when there's documentary evidence that that was false. Significant documentary evidence that that was false. More than that, He leaves out in his stories to Congress and to the House of Representatives and to the federal court and to the state court that he testified in Brazil. And when he testified in Brazil prior to the family court trial, he admitted domestic violence. He admitted sexual and pornography addiction. He admitted deviant behavior. But then he gets into the family court trial and he tells the exact opposite story. Literally the exact opposite story. In the petition which you all have, you can actually see clips of the testimony of Brazil, and in fact the recordation of his entire testimony is recorded. It's on your drives and it's attached to the petition. I offset that against the stories he tells in later litigation. Unbelievably and bizarrely, but not hugely surprisingly, nobody ever discloses that testimony in Brazil. And by the time Carlos and Jemima are charged criminally for trying to protect their daughter from this monster, they're now hamstrung by the fact that he has a judgment from a Harris County court saying, I wasn't a domestic abuser.
What do the Guimaraes want from Chris Brann?
I think at this stage, what everybody wants is to expose the truth. It's for Brann to stop selling his lies and to stop perpetrating this fraud on not just them, but on the United States government, through the U.S. Attorney's Office, through the federal court system, through the Texas courts, through the media, and through everybody who's watched the story and everybody who's had an interest in this story. I think first and foremost is to expose the truth, to stop that. After that, I think the only thing that you can want is the hopes that something can be provided to make up for the horror you've put them through.
Is there a number?
I don't think the Federal Reserve holds enough cash, in my opinion. Anybody have any more questions?
Can you elaborate more on the sentence to Carlos and Jemima, please?
The sentence?
Yes.
Yes. As a result of the criminal conviction, Jemima Guimaraes was sentenced to 30 days in the federal penitentiary. Carlos was sentenced to 3 months. They were both ordered to pay $75,000 fines to the government, which were fines associated with these criminal charges, and they were ordered to pay restitution to Chris Brann in the amount of $36,000. I think it's important for everybody to know that that is one of the primary issues in this case. One of Brann's clear motives for what he did ultimately became to further the lifestyle that he has with his new bride. In the petition, you'll see that he's lavished her with gifts, $36,000 worth of purses alone, or $31,000, a Porsche, furniture, vacations, Tiffany's wedding bands. This has to be expensive for him. So it did not surprise me in the slightest when I found out that Brann asked for, in the criminal trial, restitution from Carlos and Jemima of $1.4 million is what he requested. The federal judge gave him $36,000. Based on, in my opinion, the false evidence that he presented at the restitution hearing. You'll see when they had that hearing, you'll see what his testimony was in front of the federal court. You will see in the transcripts the cross-examination. You will see the lies that he told, having his employer construct a misleading affidavit or misleading letter regarding his pay, stating pay that he could not support that wasn't true, and grossly overinflating it. He's spending what I consider to be extraordinary sums of money on his current lifestyle with his new bride. But he contends to each and every one of you in every interview that he gives that he's prohibited from going to see his son because he can't pay the $50,000 in back child support that he owes. He's got her carrying that, his current wife carrying that on her shoulder and on her hand.
Your clients are not in prison yet, correct?
I'm sorry?
Your clients are not in prison yet? They haven't reported?
They are not. Carlos is ordered to report late this month. Jemima is ordered to report within the first few days of March.
Yeah, are they not interested in clearing their name publicly, maybe being here as the ones filing? Is there a reason why they're not here to address our questions publicly?
I think that my lawsuit is their effort to clear their name, and I think that's why they hired counsel to do so. I didn't particularly want them to be here. I think they've been through enough. They don't need cameras pointed in their face. I don't mind, but it's really kind of horrible for them, especially after all the public scrutiny and embarrassment they've gone through. I think the lawsuit was the result of extensive work on our part, and I think it expresses clearly their thoughts and feelings about this case, and then I know that what I'm expressing to you is the result of all of that as well.
Do you represent your clients in federal court?
No, that is in the federal court criminal case. That's still Rusty Hardin's office. He is the criminal counsel. I represent them civilly in relation to this lawsuit.
Thank you.
What would be your response? I reached out to Dr. Brann and his attorneys, and they say this is just another attack. It's just their way of getting revenge because of what happened in federal court. What would be your response to that?
Well, I think it is, because of the fact that what happened in federal court was built on Brann's fraud. That's exactly the point of the lawsuit. Had he not done that, there would have been no discussion to have. They may want to say that this is seeking retribution. Wouldn't you? If somebody had done this to you, wouldn't you seek the same retribution? And it's what has to be done, because this conduct cannot be allowed. In this country, we do not allow this kind of conduct, and we're not going to allow this kind of conduct, and it can't be stood for. Brann wants to tell you that he's just been under attack, and he's been under attack, and he's been under attack. All of you go back and look through the history of the media on this case, and you tell me once when those attacks were on Brann, and not on Marcelli or Carlos and Jemima, more importantly. This has been an affront by Brann. In my opinion, mafioso-style affront. If you won't give me what you want, what I want, I'll go after your family. And he used his fraudulent judgment to do so. They haven't been attacked. In fact, my opinion of this case is that nobody's ever attacked him for doing what he's doing. That stops now, because I'm gonna.
Timetable on this?
The lawsuit's on file. I'm sure Brann will be served shortly. Once he does, as you know, he'll have about 30 minutes, he'll have about 21 days to answer that lawsuit, and then we intend to start discovery immediately and fervently to start addressing and bringing out all the things that have not come out in the litigation to date. How long will this case take to resolve? Who knows?
Why go public and not let the courts take its course?
Well, that's why we filed the lawsuit. So the institution of the lawsuit that we filed, the 12th and the 13th, is specifically that. It is to bring this into litigation. The reason to go public or to have this press conference was only to ensure that none of it was misunderstood. If I give each of you the opportunity to ask me what it is you want to know, you get to know the actual story of what's behind this lawsuit, and that avoids any miscommunication. I want everybody to be clear about what's going on in this case, why this lawsuit was filed, why we're here, and what it's really about.
You said you didn't have a number for the amount of the lawsuit, but is there at least the amount that was awarded to him for the custody, along with any other damages as well?
Yes, if you're asking me to help quantify the damages, certainly. And this family has been forced to pay hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees to defend themselves from these charges. They've been awarded restitution, which I mentioned earlier, in the amount of $36,000 to Brann. Carlos has lost his profession. He was full-time working professional. He has not been able to do that. So there's been significant economic damages to his family, and those damages aren't stopping. Those economic damages will continue to mount. I think what I said was, as far as I'm concerned, the horror that they've been through that there's not enough money in the Federal Reserve, in my opinion, to compensate for somebody for that horror. There is the intangible damages that will have to be addressed, of course, and they, in my opinion, will be nothing short of millions and millions of dollars for what these people have done through. I'd ask each and every one of you to put a price on what it would take for somebody to do this to you. How much money would they have to give you for you to allow this to occur, and for allow yourself to go to federal prison for a crime that you didn't commit, which ruins your reputation, your livelihood for the rest of your life? How much money is that worth to you?
Thanks, guys. Anybody else? Your name and title?
My name is Jeff Diamant, D-I-A-M-A-N-T. I am a lawyer here in Texas, obviously. I am the owner and operator of Jeff Diamant PC, a trial law firm.
Thanks, kids.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
If anybody has any additional questions, please feel free to comment or question me or call me or whatever it is that you're supposed to do. And I think everybody's got my